I Want to See You Die. Judge sentences 10-year-old girl to death for murdering her two cousins. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The courtroom fell silent as the small figure entered through the side door. Eloise Wren was 10 years old. She wore a gray cardigan that hung loose on her narrow shoulders and thick-framed glasses that kept sliding down her nose. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She walked with her head down, flanked by two officers who seemed almost uncomfortable touching her. When she took her seat at the defense table, she didn't look up. Not at the judge, not at the packed gallery, not at the camera crews pressed against the back wall. The charge read aloud that morning was one that most people never hear spoken about a child. 2 counts of first-degree murder. The victims were her cousins, Lily, age 8, Mason, age 6. They had died during a family weekend at the Wren family cabin in rural Georgia, a place that had hosted birthday parties and Thanksgivings for 3 generations, a place that was supposed to be safe. The prosecutor stood and addressed the jury with a voice that carried through every corner of the room. This is not a case about accidents. This is not a case about tragedy. This is a case about a child who made a choice, a calculated, deliberate choice, to take the lives of 2 innocent children while their parents slept just 1 room away. Eloise didn't move. The media had already made up their minds. The headlines were everywhere: monster in glasses. The girl with no remorse. Evil wore pigtails. One tabloid even ran a photo of Eloise from a school play, circling her face in red and calling her dead-eyed. But what the cameras didn't show, what the jury never heard, was the 9-hour interrogation that had taken place 3 days after the deaths. Eloise had been questioned alone, without a parent, without a lawyer, in a windowless room with 2 detectives who told her over and over that telling the truth was the only way to help her family. And so she did. She confessed. The confession was played in court, her voice, small and tired, admitting to things that made the gallery gasp. The prosecutor called it chilling. The defense called it coerced. But by then, it didn't matter. The jury had already seen her face, Eloise. Wren was sentenced to life in a juvenile facility with no possibility of parole until age 25. She was led out of the courtroom the same way she had entered, head down, silent, small. But there was something the prosecution didn't mention during the trial, something that got buried in a folder of evidence marked irrelevant. A neighbor had called the police 2 weeks before the killings. She reported hearing shouting late at night coming from the Wren property. A man's voice, a child crying. She said it sounded like someone was being hurt. When officers followed up, they were told it was nothing, a misunderstanding. The family was fine. The report was filed away and forgotten. Until now. Because 3 years after Eloise Wren was locked away, a documentary crew began digging into the case. And what they found didn't match the story the world had been told. It didn't match it. The Wren family looked like something out of a catalog. In the weeks following the tragedy, local news stations aired the same collection of photos over and over. Smiling faces at Christmas, a group shot from a summer barbecue, Eloise standing between her aunt and uncle at a church picnic, holding a paper plate piled with potato salad. They were good people, said Margaret Holt, a neighbor who had lived 2 houses down from the Wrens for nearly a decade. She sat across from the documentary crew in her living room, hands folded in her lap. Always polite, always put together. But when asked if she ever saw anything unusual, Margaret paused. Well, there was this one time, she said slowly. I was walking my dog past their house, must have been late evening. I saw Eloise sitting on the porch steps by herself. It was cold. She didn't have a jacket on. Did you ask if she was okay? Margaret looked down. I waved. She didn't wave back, just stared. It was odd. She hesitated before adding, but kids are odd sometimes, aren't they? The Wren family had always been private. Eloise's father, Richard Wren, was a regional manager for an insurance company. Her mother, Diane, Worked part-time at the local library. They attended church most Sundays. They didn't cause trouble. Eloise's aunt and uncle, Diane's sister Karen and her husband Todd, lived just 20 minutes away. Their two children, Lily and Mason, were frequent visitors. On paper, it was the kind of tight-knit family people envied. But the photos told a different story if you looked closely. In one image from a 4th of July celebration, Eloise stood at the edge of the frame, while the other children played in the sprinkler. Her arms were crossed, her expression was blank. In another, taken at Intaichai, Lily's birthday party, Eloise sat alone at the end of the table. Everyone else was laughing. She wasn't. She was always a little off, said a former teacher who agreed to speak anonymously. Not in a dangerous way, just quiet, withdrawn. She struggled to make friends. The teacher leaned forward, lowering her voice. But I'll tell you this, she was terrified of being in trouble. If you so much as raised your voice near her, she'd freeze up completely. Did that concern you? The teacher nodded. I made a note in her file, suggested the school counselor check in, but nothing ever came of it. The weekend of the killings had been planned for weeks. The two families were meant to spend 3 days together at the cabin, fishing, hiking, playing board games by the fire. It was supposed to be a break from the routine, but something went wrong. On the second night, Lily and Mason were found in the upstairs bedroom they shared. Both had been smothered with pillows. Eloise was discovered in the hallway outside their room, sitting against the wall with her knees pulled to her chest. She wasn't crying. She didn't speak. When the police arrived, Richard Wren was the one who met them at the Dirishu. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. She did it, he said, pointing back toward the house. Our daughter. She killed them. But here's what didn't make sense. According to the initial police report, there were no signs of a struggle, no bruising on the victims, no scratches, no torn fabric. The pillows used were large, heavy, difficult for a 10-year-old to maneuver with enough force. And yet, no one questioned it, because Eloise had confessed. The documentary crew found something else buried in the case files, a photograph taken by one of the first officers on the scene. It showed the hallway where Eloise had been found. On the wall behind her, barely visible in the dim light, was a smear. It looked like blood, but it was never tested. The interrogation of Eloise Wren began at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the deaths of Lily and Mason. She had not been to school. She had not been to a funeral. She had been kept in her bedroom under what her parents called house supervision, while the police built their case. When Detective Raymond Finch arrived to bring her in for questioning, Eloise's mother answered the door. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, her hair unwashed. Is it necessary? Diane Wren asked quietly. We just need to clear a few things up, Finch replied. Routine. Richard Wren appeared behind his wife. She'll cooperate, he said firmly. We want this resolved. Eloise was brought to the station in the back of an unmarked car. No parent accompanied her. No lawyer was present. Later, the defense would argue this was a violation. The prosecution would argue that Eloise was not under arrest. She was simply a witness. The interrogation room was small, windowless, with pale green walls and a metal table bolted to the floor. A camera in the corner recorded everything, or almost everything. Detective Finch sat across from Eloise. His partner, Detective Laura Kemp, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Do you know why you're here, Eloise? Finch asked. She shook her head. We need to talk about what happened. The cabin. Can you do that? She nodded. Good, that's good. Finch smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now I need you to be honest with me, okay? No one's going to be mad. We just need the truth. For the first 2 hours, Eloise said very little. She answered in 1 or 2 words. Yes. No. I don't know. But then something shifted. Finch leaned forward, his voice soft, almost fatherly. Eloise, I know this is hard. But your family is hurting. Your mom and dad, they need to understand what happened, and the only person who can help them is you. Eloise's hands were clenched in her lap. She was trembling. Did you go into Lillian Mason's room that night? A pause. Yes. And what did you do? Her voice was barely audible. I don't remember. You don't remember, or you don't want to say? She started to cry. It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. Finch slid a box of tissues across the table. But we need you to tell us, did you hurt them? Eloise wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her voice cracked. I think so. Kemp straightened. Finch glanced at the camera. You think so? I don't know. I don't. Eloise's breathing quickened. I just want to go home. You? Will. But first you need to help us understand. How did you hurt them? I put the pillow on their faces? She nodded. And you held it there? Another nod. Why, Eloise? Why did you do that? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Because I'm bad. Finch sat back. Kemp wrote something in her notebook. Okay, Finch said quietly. Okay, thank you for being honest. The recording ended at 6:53 p.m., 9 hours after it began. But here's what the jury never heard. There was a second recording, a partial one, recovered years later from a backup server that had been scheduled for deletion. It captured the final 30 minutes of the interrogation, the part that wasn't included in the official evidence. In it, Eloise's voice is different, hollow, confused. I don't think I did it, she says. Eloise, you already told us you did. But I don't remember doing it. I just remember waking up and everyone was yelling. You're tired, you're confused, but you told us the truth before, remember? I don't know what's true anymore. Finch's voice hardens. If you change your story now, people are going to think you're lying. Do you want people to think you're a liar? Silence. Do you? No. Then stick with what you said. It's the only way this ends. The recording cuts off. No one knows what happened in the minutes after. No one knows what else was said. But when Eloise Wren walked out of that room, her confession was signed. And 3 years later, sitting in a cold facility 200 miles away, Eloise would tell the documentary crew something she had never said out loud. I didn't kill them, but I didn't know how to make anyone believe me. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. 10-year-old confesses to double murder of cousins. Within hours, it was everywhere. Cable news, social media, talk shows. The case of Eloise Wren became a national obsession almost overnight, and the tone was set immediately. A local news anchor in Atlanta opened her segment with a photo of Eloise from her school yearbook. In it, Eloise wasn't smiling. Her face was expressionless, her eyes half-lidded behind her glasses. This is the face, the anchor said, of a child who showed no remorse after confessing to the brutal murders of 2 innocent children. The word brutal was repeated constantly, even though there had been no violence beyond the act itself. No weapons, no blood. But it didn't matter. The narrative was already written. A popular true crime podcast dedicated an entire episode to the case. The host, a former prosecutor, didn't mince words. Look, I don't care how old she is. Some people are just born wrong. And when you look at that kid's face, you can see it. There's nothing there, no empathy, no soul. Comments flooded in by the thousands. Lock her up and throw away the key. She's a psychopath. You can see it in her eyes. I hope she rots. On social media, a hashtag trended for 3 straight days. Justice for Lillian Mason. Photos of the 2 victims were shared endlessly, smiling, innocent, full of life. Beside them, people posted side-by-side images of Eloise looking blank, detached, strange. One influencer with over 1 million followers made a video titled, "Why the Monster in Glasses Proves Evil Has No Age." It got 12 million views in 2 days. But buried beneath the outrage, a few voices tried to push back. A child psychologist appeared on a morning talk show and attempted to explain that children under extreme stress often appear emotionless as a defense mechanism. She was cut off mid-sentence. Are you seriously defending a child who confessed to murder? The host asked. I'm not defending anyone. I'm trying to explain. We've heard enough. Thank you for your time. The segment moved on. By the time Eloise's trial began, the jury pool had already been poisoned. It took 3 weeks to find 12. People who claimed they could remain impartial. But every single one of them had seen the headlines. Every single one of them had seen her face. The prosecution leaned into the media narrative. During opening statements, the lead prosecutor displayed a blown-up image of Eloise on a screen behind him. This, he said, pointing, is the face of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The defense objected. The judge sustained it. But the image stayed up for several seconds longer than necessary. The damage was done. One juror, interviewed years later under condition of anonymity, admitted the truth. We all thought she looked off, he said, cold, like something was missing. I know you're not supposed to judge someone by how they look, but he trailed off. It's hard not to. Among the key witnesses called by the prosecution was Eloise's aunt Karen. She took the stand. Wearing all black, her face drawn and pale. When asked to describe her niece, she hesitated. Eloise was always different, Karen said carefully. She didn't play like other kids. She didn't laugh much. She preferred to be alone. Did that concern you? At times, yes. Did you ever feel unsafe? Around her, Karen's jaw tightened. Not until that night. But here's what Karen didn't say on the stand. 2 weeks before the trip to the cabin, she had called Diane in tears. The call lasted 18 minutes. Phone records confirmed it. But the content of that call was never disclosed in court. The documentary crew tracked Karen down 3 years later. She agreed to an interview but refused to be filmed, audio only. When asked about the phone call, she went silent for a long moment. I can't talk about that, she finally said. Why not? Because it doesn't change what happened. But what was the call about? Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I told Diane I was worried. Not about Eloise, about... She stopped herself. I can't. I'm sorry. I just can't. The line went dead. But the existence of that call raised a question no one had asked during the trial. If Karen was worried, why did she still bring her children to the cabin? There was one witness whose testimony carried more weight than anyone else's. His name was Todd Hartman, Karen's husband, and the father of Lillian Mason. Todd was the first person to discover the bodies that morning. He was the one who ran downstairs shouting for help. He was the one who made the frantic 911 call, his voice breaking as he tried to explain what he'd found. And he was the one who, during the trial, sat stone-faced in the gallery, watching Eloise with an expression that never changed. When called to testify, Todd walked to the stand slowly, his shoulders hunched. He didn't look at Eloise, not once. The prosecutor asked him to recount the events of that morning. Todd's voice was flat, mechanical. I woke up around 7. Karen was already downstairs making coffee. I went to check on the kids. He paused. The door to their room was cracked open. That wasn't normal. They always kept it closed. What did you do? I pushed it open. And I saw them. His hands gripped the edge of the witness box. They were lying in their beds, pillows over their faces. I pulled them off, tried to wake them, but his voice broke. They were already gone. And where was Eloise? In the hallway, sitting on the floor, just staring at nothing. Did she say anything to you? No. Did she react when you asked her what happened? No. Did she cry? Todd's jaw clenched. No. The prosecutor let that sit for a moment, before continuing. In your opinion, Mr. Hartman, based on what you saw that morning, do you believe Eloise Wren is responsible for the deaths of your children? The defense objected. The judge sustained it, but Todd had already answered. Yes, he said quietly. I do. But there was something about Todd's testimony that didn't sit right. A local journalist who had covered the trial from day one noticed it first. She mentioned it in a blog post that barely anyone read at the time. Todd Hartman's testimony felt rehearsed. Every pause was in the same place, every detail identical to his previous statements. It wasn't the testimony of someone remembering, it was the testimony of someone repeating. 3 years later, the documentary crew obtained access to an old VHS recording, a home video shot 6 months before the killings. It had been submitted as evidence but never played in court. The prosecution deemed it irrelevant. The footage showed a family gathering, a birthday party for Lily. In the background, barely audible, Todd and Richard, Eloise's father, could be heard talking near the grill. "You need to keep her under control," Todd said, his voice low but sharp. "I'm handling it." Richard replied, "Are you? Because Karen's getting worried and I don't want this turning into a problem." "It won't. It better not." The conversation ended there. The camera panned away. But the documentary crew didn't stop digging. They found another piece of footage, this one from a neighbor's security camera. It was dated 2 weeks before the cabin trip, late at night. The timestamp read 11:43 p.m. The video showed Todd's car pulling into the Wren family driveway. He got out, walked to the front door, and knocked. Richard answered. The two men spoke briefly on the porch. Their body language was tense. At one point, Todd pointed his finger at Richard's chest. Richard stepped back, hands raised as if trying to calm him down. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Then Todd got back in his car and drove away. When the documentary crew asked Richard Wren about that visit, his answer was clipped. "I don't recall." "You don't recall a late-night visit from your brother-in-law 2 weeks before your daughter was accused of killing his children?" Richard's face hardened. "I said, I don't recall. But someone else did. A woman named Beverly Pruitt, who lived across." The street from the Wrens came forward after seeing a clip from the documentary online. She called the production office and left a voicemail. "I saw that visit," she said. "I was taking my trash out. I heard them arguing. I didn't catch most of it, but I heard Todd say something I'll never forget." The crew called her back immediately. "What did he say?" they asked. Beverly hesitated, then spoke carefully. He said, "If you don't deal with this, I will." Eloise Wren's defense attorney was a man named Harold Pitts. He was 63 years old, court-appointed, and handling his 4th case that month. His office was a cramped room above a laundromat in downtown Macon. His paralegal was his daughter, who worked part-time between shifts at a diner. Harold Pitts was not a bad man, but he was tired, and he was in over his head. "I did the best I could with what I had," Pitts said. During his interview with the documentary crew, he sat in the same small office, older now, grayer. His hands shook slightly as he poured himself coffee from a stained pot. "Do you think you gave Eloise a fair defense?" He looked down. "I think I gave her the defense I was capable of giving." "That's not the same thing." He didn't argue. The prosecution's case was built on 3 pillars: Eloise's confession, the lack of any other suspect, and the testimony of family members who painted her as strange, detached, and capable of violence. Harold Pitts challenged none of it effectively. He didn't call a child psychologist to explain coerced confessions. He didn't hire a forensic expert to examine the scene. He didn't question why there were no fingerprints on the pillows, no fibers, no DNA evidence linking Eloise to the act itself. When asked why, Pitts rubbed his face. "I didn't have the budget. Court-appointed cases don't come with funds for expert witnesses. I requested them. I was denied." "What about the interrogation? You could have argued it was coercive." "I did argue that. The judge ruled the confession admissible. What else was I supposed to do?" "You could have appealed." Pitts looked at the camera. "With what time? What money? I had 3 other clients that same month. I was drowning." But there was something else, something Pitts didn't mention during his interview. The documentary crew obtained emails between Pitts and the district attorney's office, sent weeks before the trial began. In one exchange, the DA offered a plea deal. Eloise would plead guilty to manslaughter. She'd serve time in a juvenile facility until age 18, then be released. Pitts forwarded the offer to Richard and Diane Wren. Their response was immediate. No deal. She needs to take responsibility. Let the jury decide. When the crew asked Richard about this years later, he stood by the decision. She confessed, he said flatly. There was no reason to make a deal. But Diane's response was different. She agreed to speak only once, briefly, over the phone. Her voice was quiet, strained. I didn't want her to take a deal, she admitted, but Richard said it would look like we were protecting a murderer. He said people would think we didn't care about Lily and Mason. And what did you think? A long pause. I thought maybe she didn't do it. Then why didn't you fight harder? Diane's voice broke. Because I was afraid. Of what? She hung up. The trial itself lasted 8 days. Pitts called only 2 witnesses, a school counselor who said Eloise was a quiet but nonviolent child, and a neighbor who testified she had never seen Eloise act aggressively. The prosecution tore both testimonies apart in minutes. When it came time for closing arguments, Pitts stood before the jury and did his best, but his voice lacked conviction. His words felt hollow. Eloise Wren is a child, he said, a confused, scared child who was put in a room with 2 detectives for 9 hours and told the only way out was to confess. That is not justice. That is coercion. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on both counts. But here's what no one knew at the time. Harold Pitts had a connection to the case that he never disclosed. His daughter, the paralegal who helped him prepare Eloise's defense, had gone to high school with Karen, Todd's wife. They weren't close, but they knew each other. And 3 weeks before the trial, Karen had called her. The call lasted 11 minutes. No one knows what was said. But afterward, Pitts's daughter told her father something that made him pause. A producer on the documentary crew tracked her down. She refused an on-camera interview, but agreed to speak off the record. What did Karen say to you? The producer asked. The daughter hesitated. She said Eloise wasn't the only one in that house who had a reason to want those kids gone. What does that mean? I don't know. I asked her to explain, but she wouldn't. She just said, make sure your dad doesn't dig too deep. The producer pressed further. Did you tell your father? I did. And what did he say? She exhaled slowly. He said we couldn't afford to dig too deep, not with what we were being paid. Harold Pitts never mentioned that call, not in court, not in any filing, not to anyone. And Eloise Wren, 10 years old, was sentenced to life. Lily and Mason Hartman were by all accounts bright and happy children. Lily was 8 years old. She loved drawing, especially horses. Her teacher described her as enthusiastic and a little bossy, but in a sweet way. She had a collection of over 40 stuffed animals and insisted on naming each one. Mason was 6. He was obsessed with dinosaurs. He carried a plastic T-Rex in his pocket everywhere he went. His kindergarten teacher said he asked more questions than any child she'd ever taught. They were loved. They were missed. But the documentary crew wanted to understand something the trial had barely touched. What was the real relationship between Eloise and her cousins? The official narrative, repeated in court and in the media, was simple. Eloise was jealous, resentful. She felt overshadowed by Lily and Mason, who were outgoing and adored while she was quiet and overlooked. But the evidence for this was thin. No one could point to a specific incident. No fight, no argument, just a general sense that Eloise didn't fit in. The crew tracked down some of Eloise's old schoolwork, stored in a box at her former elementary school. Among the papers was a journal assignment from 3rd grade. The prompt read, "Write about someone you care about." Eloise had written about Lily. "My cousin Lily is funny. She makes me laugh even when I am sad. She says I am her favorite cousin. I hope that is true." The handwriting was careful, deliberate. There was a small drawing in the margin, 2 stick figures holding hands. A second assignment, from later that, Same year, asked students to write about a time they felt happy. Eloise wrote, "I felt happy when Mason let me play dinosaurs with him. He said I could be the Triceratops. He said I was good at it." These were not the words of a child filled with jealousy or rage. The crew also found a drawing Lily had made tucked inside a folder of her schoolwork that Karen had kept. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a house. One was labeled me, another Mason, and the third, slightly off to the side, was labeled Eloise. All 3 were smiling, but there was something else in the archives, something darker. A school counselor's report filed 8 months before the killings. It involved an incident during recess. Lily had pushed another student off the swings. The girl had scraped her knee and started crying. When a teacher intervened, Lily claimed the girl had stolen her turn. The teacher noted, Lily became highly defensive when corrected, refused to apologize, showed no empathy for the injured child. The report recommended a follow-up meeting with Lily's parents. That meeting never happened. Mason had his own incident, documented in a different file. A classmate's mother had called the school to complain that Mason had bitten her son during a playdate. When questioned, Mason said the boy wouldn't share and deserved it. Karen's response, according to the notes, "Boys will be boys. It's not a big deal." None of this was presented at trial, none of it fit the narrative. But the most revealing piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, Eloise's own diary. It had been entered into evidence but never read aloud in court. The prosecution deemed it irrelevant. The defense never pushed to include it. The documentary crew obtained a copy. Most entries were mundane, notes about homework, complaints about the weather. But one entry, dated 3 weeks before the cabin trip, stood out. "Lily told me a secret today. She said if I tell anyone, she will make sure I get in trouble. I don't know what to do. I don't want her to be mad at me." There was no indication of what the secret was, but 2 pages later, another entry. "Mason cried today. I asked him why. He said he can't say. He said Dad will get mad. I told him it's okay. He said it's not." The crew brought these entries to a child psychologist specializing in trauma. She read them carefully, then looked up. "These are the words of a child who feels unsafe," she said. "Not a child planning violence. A child who's trying to navigate a situation she doesn't understand." "What kind of situation?" The psychologist hesitated. "One where fear is being used as control." When asked to clarify, she continued, "Children don't keep secrets because they want to. They keep secrets because they've been told to, or because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't." The crew tried to locate other children who had spent time with Eloise, Lily, and Mason. Most families refused to speak. But one mother, whose daughter had attended Lily's birthday party months before the deaths, agreed to talk off camera. "My daughter came home that day and said something that stuck with me," the mother said. "She said Lily had yelled at Eloise for sitting in the wrong chair, called her stupid in front of everyone. I asked if an adult said anything. She said no, they just laughed." Who laughed? The parents. Money has a way of revealing motive, and in the Wren family, money was tighter than anyone wanted to admit. Richard Wren's job as a regional insurance manager sounded stable, but the reality was more complicated. The documentary crew obtained employment records showing that Richard had been placed on a performance improvement plan 6 months before the killings. His sales numbers were down. He'd missed quota 3 quarters in a row. There were whispers of a potential layoff. Diane worked part-time at the library, but her hours had been cut due to budget constraints. The family was living paycheck to paycheck, juggling credit card debt and a mortgage that was underwater after the 2008 housing crash. Then there was the cabin. It had belonged to Richard's parents. When they passed, the property was left to Richard and his younger brother, Marcus. The two were supposed to share it, but Marcus had moved to Oregon years earlier and wanted to sell. Richard refused. The brothers stopped speaking, but the cabin came with costs: property taxes, upkeep, insurance. Costs Richard couldn't afford. Which brings us to the insurance policy. 3 months before the trip, Richard took out a life insurance policy on Eloise. It wasn't unusual for parents to have policies on their children, but the amount was $250,000. When, asked about it during a brief phone interview, Richard was defensive. It was a standard policy, something my job offered. I took it because it made sense. But the benefit amount, I don't have to explain my financial decisions to you. He hung up. But there was more. Todd and Karen Hartman also had life insurance policies on their children. Each child was insured for $100,000. The policies had been active for 2 years. After the deaths of Lily and Mason, Karen received a payout of $200,000. The documentary crew requested financial records from the months following the tragedy. Karen's bank statements showed the deposit. Then, 2 weeks later, a wire transfer, $50,000, sent to Richard Wren. When confronted about this, Karen agreed to answer one question over email. Why did you send Richard $50,000 after your children died? Her response came 3 days later. It was a loan. He needed help, that's all I'm going to say. But loans require repayment. And there was no record of Richard ever paying her back. The crew dug deeper. They found something buried in county records, a lien filed against the cabin. Property. It had been placed there by a contractor Richard owed money to for repairs that were never completed. The amount? $48,000. 2 weeks after receiving Karen's $50,000, Richard paid off the lien in full. A forensic accountant reviewed the case files and financial records. Her assessment was blunt. Richard Wren was in serious financial trouble. He was at risk of losing the cabin, which was probably the only asset of value he had. Then, after the tragedy, he suddenly has access to $50,000 that clears his debt. That's not a coincidence. Are you saying he had a financial motive? She chose her words carefully. I'm saying that financial desperation makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. But the money trail didn't end there. There was another policy, one that had been quietly amended. The cabin itself was insured. The policy covered fire, theft, and accidental death on the property. It had a clause, common in older policies, that paid out an additional benefit if a death occurred on site due to criminal activity. That clause was worth $300,000, and it named Richard Wren as the sole beneficiary. No claim was ever filed. The cabin still stood. No one died in a way that triggered the clause. But the existence of the policy raised a disturbing question. If Richard had known about that clause, and as the co-owner, he almost certainly did, then he would have known that a death on the property under the right circumstances could solve all his financial problems. The crew tried to reach Richard one more time. He didn't answer. But his lawyer sent a letter. Any implication that Mr. Wren had financial motive in the deaths of his niece and nephew is defamatory and will be met with legal action. Mr. Wren loved those children. This line of inquiry is unconscionable. But there was one more document the crew uncovered, a small, overlooked receipt from a hardware store, dated 1 week before the cabin trip. The purchase? 2 heavy-duty pillow inserts, industrial grade, the kind used for outdoor furniture. The receipt was signed by Richard Wren. Crime scenes tell stories, but only if someone's listening. The Wren family cabin was processed by local police over the course of 2 days. Photographs were taken. Evidence was collected. Reports were filed. But the investigation was rushed. The confession had already been obtained. Eloise had admitted to the crime. In the eyes of law enforcement, the case was closed before it even began. Once you have a confession, especially from someone at the scene, the pressure to move quickly is enormous, said Dr. Alan Greaves, a consultant brought in by the documentary crew to review the case files. But that pressure often leads to tunnel vision. You stop looking for answers because you think you already have them. Dr. Greaves spent 3 weeks reviewing every photograph, every report, every piece of evidence logged from the cabin, and he found something that had been missed: It was in one of the scene photos taken by a deputy on the morning the bodies were discovered. The image showed the upstairs hallway where Eloise had been found sitting. Behind her, on the wall, there was a smear, reddish-brown, roughly the size of a handprint. It's visible in at least 4 different photos, Dr. Greaves explained, pointing to his computer screen. But it was never swabbed, never tested. It's listed in the evidence log as unidentified residue, and then nothing. No follow-up. Could it have been blood? Absolutely. Or it could have been something else. But we'll never know because no one checked. The crew reached out to the sheriff's office that had handled the investigation. The current sheriff, who had not been in office at the time, agreed to review the photos. His response was measured. It's possible it was overlooked. But without a sample, there's nothing we can do now. Could you try to recover a sample from the scene? The cabin was sold 2 years ago. It's been renovated. Any biological material would be long gone. Another dead end. But Dr. Greaves wasn't finished. He focused next on the pillows used in the smothering. According to the original report, 2 pillows had been found on the victims. Both were large, oversized decorative pillows commonly used on beds in guest rooms. Crime scene photos showed them lying on the floor beside the beds. They had been bagged and taken into evidence, but they were never tested for DNA. Why not? The crew asked the lead investigator from the original case, a retired detective named Carl Hayes. Hayes, now in his 70s, sat in his living room, visibly uncomfortable. We had the confession, the pillows were at the scene, what else did we need? Fingerprints, DNA, proof that Eloise actually handled them. Hayes shifted in his seat. She was 10 years old. She lived in that house. Her prints and DNA would have been everywhere anyway. But you didn't test to confirm that. He looked away. No, we didn't. Dr. Greaves examined the photos more closely. He noticed something about the pillows, the way they were positioned. Both were lying face down, as if they'd been carefully placed rather than dropped. When something is used in a violent act and then discarded, it's usually tossed aside carelessly, he explained. But these pillows were laid flat, almost deliberately. That suggests staging. Staging by who? Someone who wanted the scene to look a certain way. But the most damning piece of forgotten evidence was something that had been logged and then buried in a file cabinet. A small, unassuming item. A keychain. It had been found under Mason's bed, tucked against the baseboard where it wouldn't be easily seen. The keychain had a distinctive emblem on it, a logo from a sporting goods company. It didn't belong to Mason. It didn't belong to Lily. It didn't belong to Eloise. When the crew showed a photograph of the keychain to Karen, she stared at it for a long time. "Do you recognize this?" they asked. She nodded slowly. "That's Todd's. He had one just like it. He got it at a trade show years ago." "Why would it be under Mason's bed?" Karen's face went pale. "I don't know. Did Todd ever mention losing it?" She shook her head. "No, but Todd lost things all the time. Keys, wallets, I didn't think anything of it." The crew pressed further. "Karen, if this keychain belonged to Todd, that means he was in that room, possibly the night the children died." Karen stood abruptly. "I think we're done here." "Karen!" I said we're done. But the crew didn't stop. They contacted Todd directly. He refused to speak to them. His lawyer sent a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if they continued to harass him. Dr. Greaves reviewed the keychain evidence one final time. "This object places Todd Hartman in that room at some point. Whether it was that night or earlier, we don't know. But it should have been investigated. It wasn't." He paused, choosing his words carefully. When evidence is ignored, you have to ask yourself why. Was it incompetence, or was it intentional? Lies are easier to maintain when everyone tells a small one. The documentary crew began re-interviewing witnesses from the original trial. Not all of them agreed to speak, but enough did. And when their new statements were compared to their testimony from 3 years earlier, cracks began to show. Margaret Holt, the Neighbor, who had described the Wren family as good people, admitted something she hadn't said in court. "I saw Richard and Todd arguing outside the cabin the night before it happened," she said quietly. "I was driving past on my way home from church. It was late, maybe 10:30. They were standing by Todd's car. Richard had his hands up like he was trying to calm Todd down. Why didn't you mention this during the trial?" Margaret looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't asked. And honestly, I didn't think it mattered. Families argue. But you remember it now." "I remember it because of how angry Todd looked." Another witness, a clerk at the local gas station near the cabin, came forward after seeing a clip from the documentary online. "I sold Todd Hartman a pack of cigarettes the night before those kids died," the clerk said. "I remember because he doesn't usually smoke. He told me he stressed. Said something about fixing a problem before it got worse." "Did he say what the problem was?" "No, but he looked wound up, real tight." The crew returned to Karen with this new information. She agreed to meet, but only in a public place, a diner 20 miles outside of town. She looked exhausted, older than her years. "Karen, we've spoken to multiple people who say Todd was agitated the night before the children died. Do you remember him being upset?" She stirred her coffee slowly. "Todd was always upset about something." "Was he upset that night?" A long pause. "Yes." "What was he upset about?" Karen's hands trembled slightly. "He didn't want to be there. He didn't want the kids there. He said it was a bad idea." "Why?" She looked out the window. "He said Eloise made him uncomfortable." "Did he say why?" "No, just that something was off about her." Karen's voice dropped. "But that wasn't true." "What do you mean?" She finally looked at the crew. "Todd didn't like Eloise because Richard owed him money. A lot of money. They'd gone in on some investment together years before, and it fell through. Todd blamed Richard, said he'd been lied to." "How much money?" $70,000. The crew cross-referenced this with financial records. Todd had loaned Richard the money 5 years earlier for a business venture that never materialized. There was no contract, no legal documentation, just a handshake and a promise to pay it back. Richard never did. "Todd brought it up constantly," Karen continued. "Every family gathering, every phone call, he wanted his money. Richard kept stalling. And the night before the children died." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Todd told Richard he was done waiting. He said if Richard didn't find a way to pay him back, he'd make sure the whole family knew what kind of man Richard really was." "What did he mean by that?" Karen shook her head. "I don't know. Todd never explained." But the crew found someone who did. Marcus Wren, Richard's estranged brother, agreed to a phone interview. He lived in Oregon and hadn't spoken to Richard in over a decade. "Richard's always been a liar," Marcus said bluntly. "Growing up, he lied about everything. Grades, money, where he was, what he was doing. Our parents enabled it. I got tired of it and left." "Do you know what Todd meant when he threatened to expose Richard?" Marcus hesitated. "I know Richard did something he shouldn't have. Something involving Diane's family money." "Can you be more specific?" "Diane's parents left her an inheritance when they died. About $100,000. Richard convinced her to let him invest it. He lost it all. Gambling. Bad deals, I don't know. But it was gone. Diane didn't find out until years later." "Did Todd know about this?" "Todd knew everything. He and Richard were close once, before the money thing." The crew returned to Richard with this information. He refused to comment. But his lawyer issued another statement. "Mr. Wren's private financial matters have no bearing on this case. This is a shameful attempt to distract from the fact that his daughter confessed to a horrific crime." But the pattern was clear now. Richard had lied about money. Todd had lied about why he was upset. Karen had lied about what she knew. Even Diane had stayed silent about things she should have said. Small lies. Individually, they seemed harmless. But together, they created a picture that protected everyone except Eloise. Some people carry secrets until they can't anymore. The call came in 3 months after the documentary crew began their investigation, a woman's voice shaky and unsure. "My name is Rachel Deneen. I was the nanny for Todd and Karen's kids. I need to talk to you." They met in a coffee shop in Savannah, 2 hours from where the Hartmans lived. Rachel was in her early 30s now, but she looked worn down, tired in a way that went beyond sleepless nights. She set her phone on the table between them. On the screen was a video file. "I recorded this 3 weeks before Lily and Mason died," she said. "I didn't know what else to do." The crew watched. The footage was shaky, filmed from inside Rachel's purse, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. The audio was muffled but clear enough. Todd's voice came first, angry, loud. "I'm not going to that cabin, Karen. I'm done pretending everything's fine." Karen's voice, quieter. "The kids are excited. We can't just cancel." "Then go. Without me." "Todd, please. He owes me. And if he doesn't pay, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what he did. To you. To Diane. To all of us." A pause. Then Todd again, sharper. "Maybe it's time people knew the truth about Richard. About what kind of father he really is." The video ended. Rachel looked at the crew with red-rimmed eyes. "I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But after everything happened, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why didn't you come forward during the trial?" Her voice broke. "Because Karen called me the day after the kids died. She told me if I said anything about that conversation, Todd would make sure I never worked again. She said it had nothing to do with what happened, that I'd only make things worse." "And you believed her?" Rachel wiped her face. "I was 23. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But there's something else." It was a photocopy of a text message exchange between Karen and Todd, dated the morning of the killings. "Karen, are you awake?" Todd, "Yeah." Karen, "I heard something upstairs." Todd, "I'll check." Karen, "Be careful. No response after that." Rachel looked at the crew. If Todd went upstairs that morning, why didn't he say that in court? Todd Hartman was a well-respected man in his community. He coached Little League. He volunteered at the local food bank. After the deaths of his children, the town rallied around him. A fundraiser brought in over $30,000. People called him a grieving hero, but the documentary crew found a different story. A former co-worker agreed to speak anonymously. Todd had a temper. Most people didn't see it, but those of us who worked with him knew. He'd snap over small things, throw things. One time he punched a wall because a client complained. Another person, a neighbor from years earlier, recalled an incident. "We lived next door to Todd and Karen before they moved. One night, I heard yelling. Then something broke. The next day, Karen had a bruise on her arm. She said she fell, but I didn't believe her." The crew obtained hospital records. Karen had been treated twice for injuries in the 3 years before the killings. Once for a sprained wrist, once for bruised ribs. Both times the cause was listed as accidental fall. It wasn't one lie. It was 100 small ones stacked carefully on top of each other. A family built on silence, on looking the other way, on protecting the wrong people for the wrong reasons. The documentary crew laid it all out. Richard had lied about his financial situation. He'd hidden debts, lost money that wasn't his, and was on the verge of losing everything. Todd had lied about his whereabouts that morning. He'd gone upstairs, his own text messages proved it, but he never mentioned it in court. Karen had lied about what she knew, about the arguments, about Todd's temper, about the fear she lived with. Diane had stayed silent. About the inheritance Richard stole. About the fights, about the control. Even Harold Pitts, Eloise's own attorney, had been told not to dig too deep. And at the center of it all was a 10-year-old girl who had been taught her entire life that speaking up meant punishment. The crew interviewed a psychologist who specialized in family systems and coercive control. What you're describing is a closed system, she explained. Everyone inside protects the system, even at the cost of truth, even at the cost of a child. Why would they do that? Because the alternative is admitting they were complicit, that they allowed harm to happen, that they benefited from the harm. It's easier to blame the least powerful person in the room. The crew returned to Beverly Pruitt, the neighbor who had overheard Todd's threat. "Do you think Todd hurt those children?" they asked. Beverly looked at the camera. "I think someone did, and I don't think it was Eloise." But there was one more person who needed to speak. Diane Wren. She finally agreed to an in-person interview. No cameras, just audio. She sat across from the crew in a small, plain room. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "I should have protected her," Diane said quietly, "but I didn't know how." Protected her from what? Diane's voice was barely a whisper. "From Richard. From all of it." "What do you mean?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Richard told me if I said anything, he'd make sure I lost her. Completely. He said no one would believe me, and I was too scared to find out if he was right." "What didn't you say, Diane?" She closed her eyes. "That Richard wasn't at the cabin the night those children died. He left. He said he needed air. He was gone for over an hour. And you didn't tell anyone?" "He told me not to." The breakthrough came from the last place anyone expected, a storage unit in Valdosta, Georgia, rented under Karen Hartman's maiden name, paid for monthly, automatically, for the past 3 years. The crew only found it because of a clerical error, a missed payment. Triggered a notice sent to an old address which was forwarded to Karen's sister, who mentioned it in passing during an unrelated conversation. When the crew contacted the storage facility, they were told the unit was still active. Karen had visited it once 2 months earlier. They asked Karen about. She refused to comment, but her lawyer made a mistake. In his response, he mentioned that the contents of the unit were personal belongings with no relevance to the case, which meant he knew what was inside. The crew filed a legal request. It took 6 weeks, but eventually a judge ordered the unit opened as part of the ongoing investigation into potential wrongful conviction. Inside, they found boxes, old family photos, tax documents, nothing unusual, until they reached the back, a small duffel bag. Inside it, a jacket, men's size large, dark blue. It was covered in stains. The crew had it tested. The results came back in 10 days, blood, type O negative, Lily's blood type. But there was something else, fibers embedded in the fabric, synthetic fill, the same material used in heavy-duty pillow inserts. The jacket belonged to Todd Hartman. When confronted, Todd's lawyer released a statement. "Mr. Hartman has no comment at this time. Any allegations are speculative and unfounded." But Karen broke. She agreed to one final interview, on camera this time. She sat in the same chair where Eloise had once been interrogated. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "I found the jacket, too." "Days after it happened," Karen said, her voice hollow. "It was in Todd's car, shoved under the seat. I asked him why there was blood on it. He said he'd tried to help the kids, that he'd checked on them and pulled the pillows off. But he never said that in court." "No. Why not?" Karen's hands shook. "Because if he admitted he was in that room, people would ask why, and he couldn't answer that." "Why couldn't he?" She looked directly at the camera. "Because Todd was the one who put the pillows there." The room went silent. Karen continued, her voice breaking. "He didn't mean to kill them. He just wanted to scare Richard, to hurt him the way Richard had hurt us. But he pressed too hard, and when he realized what he'd done, he panicked. And he blamed Eloise." Karen nodded, tears streaming. "We both did. The truth didn't come with sirens or handcuffs. It came quietly, in a small hearing room, 3 years and 4 months after Eloise Wren was sentenced. The evidence was presented. The jacket, the blood, the storage unit, Rachel's video, Karen's testimony, the financial records, the text messages. Piece by piece, the case against Eloise Wren fell apart. Todd Hartman was arrested on 2 counts of manslaughter. Karen was charged as an accessory after the fact. Richard Wren faced charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. But none of that brought Lillian Mason back, and none of it erased what had been done to Eloise. The documentary crew was granted permission to visit Eloise at the juvenile facility, where she'd spent the last 3 years. She was 13 now, taller, quieter, if that was even possible. She sat across from them in a visitation room, her hands folded on the table. She still wore glasses. They were newer now, but they still slid down her nose. "How are you?" the interviewer asked gently. Eloise shrugged. "Okay, I guess. Do you understand what's happening? That you're going to be released?" She nodded. "They told me. How does that feel?" A long pause. "I don't know yet." The interviewer leaned forward slightly. "Eloise, can I ask you something? Do you remember that night? The night Lillian Mason died?" Eloise looked down at her hands. "Some of it. Can you tell us what you remember?" She took a breath. "I remember waking up. I heard something upstairs, like a thump. I got scared, so I got out of bed and went to check." "What did you see?" "The door to their room was open. I walked in and I saw Uncle Todd. He was standing over Mason's bed. He had a pillow in his hands." Her voice wavered. "I didn't understand what was happening. I just stood there. And then he looked at me. He looked so scared and he said, 'Go back to bed, Eloise. You didn't see anything.'" "What did you do?" "I ran into the hallway. I sat down because my legs wouldn't work. I couldn't move. I just sat there. And then everyone started yelling, and my dad came upstairs, and Uncle Todd was crying, and my dad looked at me and said, 'What did you do?'" Eloise's eyes filled with tears. "I said I didn't do anything, but no one believed me. My dad kept saying I must have done it, that I was the only one up there. And Uncle Todd didn't say anything. He just stood there." "Why do you think your dad said that?" Eloise wiped her face. "I think he was scared too. I think he didn't want it to be Uncle Todd, so it had to be me. And when the police asked you if you did it, they kept asking, and I kept saying I didn't know. But they said if I just told the truth, everything would be okay. So I said maybe I did it, because maybe I did and I just didn't remember. Maybe I was bad and I didn't even know." She looked up, her voice breaking. "I just wanted it to stop. I just wanted to go home." The interviewer's own eyes were wet. "Eloise, I'm so sorry. You should never have been put in that room. You should never have been blamed." Eloise didn't respond. She just sat there, small and still, the way she'd been sitting for 3 years. Eloise was released 6 weeks later. She didn't go back to her family. Diane had filed for divorce from Richard and moved to another state. She'd offered to take Eloise, but Eloise declined. She was placed with a foster family 2 hours away, somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew her name. The documentary aired 4 months later. It was watched by millions. Some people were outraged, some were heartbroken, some didn't believe it, but the story was out there. Now. And Eloise's name for the first time wasn't attached to the word monster. 2 years after her release, Eloise agreed to one final interview. She was 15. She looked more like herself now, or maybe for the first time she was allowed to be herself. "Do you ever think about Lillian Mason?" the interviewer asked. "Every day," Eloise said quietly. "What do you think about?" "I think about how they didn't deserve what happened, and how I didn't either." She paused. "But I also think about how everyone was so ready to believe I did it, because I was weird, because I didn't fit. Do you forgive them?" Eloise thought about it for a long time. "I don't know if I can, but I don't want to be angry forever." "What do you want?" She looked directly at the camera. "I want people to know that the truth doesn't always win, that sometimes the wrong person pays, and that if you don't fight, For the ones who can't fight for themselves, they'll disappear. Her voice was steady now, strong. I almost disappeared, she said, but I'm still here. Todd Hartman was sentenced to 18 years. Karen received 5 years, suspended after 2. Richard served 6 months for obstruction and was released on probation. None of them ever apologized to Eloise. The Wren family cabin was sold. The new owners tore it down and built something new in its place. Eloise finished high school. She started college. She studied psychology. And though the world had tried to make her into something she wasn't, she refused to let them. Because the truth doesn't always heal. It doesn't undo the damage, but it does something else. It gives you back your voice, and sometimes that's enough.